The night my mother tore my future apart, the house didn't shake. That's what I remember most. Not screaming. Not shattered glass. Not rage. Just the soft sound of paper ripping while meatloaf cooled on the stove, and the evening news whispered from the living room like nothing important was happening at all. A life can end quietly. Mine almost did. I was 18 years old when my mother stood under the yellow kitchen light and tore my Massachusetts Institute of Technology acceptance letter into 4 careful pieces. Not fast. Not angry. Slow enough that I could hear every fiber separate. The first tear went straight through the word congratulations. The second cut through the sentence that said my tuition would be fully covered. And the last tear, the one I still hear sometimes when I can't sleep, split my name directly down the middle. Teresa. Gone in half. This is not who we are, my mother said. That was all. No shouting. No dramatic speech. No threats. Just those 6 words spoken calmly while my little sister stood frozen on the staircase and my grandmother watched television with the volume muted in the next room like she'd already seen the scene once before. Maybe she had. At 4 in the morning, while the house slept, I sat on the cold bathroom floor with a roll of Scotch tape in my lap and pieced my future back together one trembling strip at a time. At 5, I left home. I didn't come back for 7 years. And when I finally did, I carried something into my grandmother's 80th birthday party that cracked open 3 generations of silence in less than 5 minutes. My mother still refuses to talk about what happened that day. But to understand why, you have to understand the women in my family. You have to understand the rule. In the Davis family, the eldest daughter stayed. Always. No one remembered who started it. By the time I was born, the tradition had hardened into something people treated like scripture. The eldest daughter stayed home. She cooked. She cared for the parents. She married local. She learned recipes instead of dreams. My grandmother stayed. My mother stayed. My Aunt Carol stayed. I was expected to stay too. Nobody ever officially explained it to me because they didn't think explanation was necessary. Traditions survive best when nobody questions them aloud. Instead, they teach you slowly. Through repetition. Through expectation. Through tiny invisible walls. Our house on Mahanango Street in Pottsville, Pennsylvania, smelled like boiled cabbage in winter and cinnamon apples in fall. The floors creaked in the same places every year. My grandmother sat in the front room every evening in her green corduroy chair with the television volume muted because she claimed she could hear better without sound. The center of our family was the wooden recipe box that lived permanently on the kitchen counter. Oak. Hand-carved. Davis etched into the lid. Inside were generations of recipe cards written in slanted handwriting. Pierogies. Applesauce cake. Chicken paprikash. Soup thick enough to survive winter. But the box held more than recipes. It held instructions for becoming the kind of woman my family approved of. I learned early that intelligence was acceptable only when it remained useful to others. Being good at math meant balancing grocery budgets. Being organized meant planning church dinners. Being responsible meant sacrificing first. Dreams were dangerous if they pointed away from home. Especially for girls like me. I became excellent at pretending. At school, I was quiet but brilliant. Teachers pulled me aside and asked about scholarships. Guidance counselors handed me brochures. My physics teacher once stared at a test score for so long I thought I'd done something wrong. "Teresa," he said finally, "do you understand how unusual this is?" I did. That was the problem. At home, I acted smaller. I never argued openly. Women in my family didn't rebel loudly. We rebelled in hidden corners where nobody could interrupt us. Mine was the second-floor library table behind the encyclopedias. That's where I filled out college applications in secret. That's where I registered for the SAT. That's where I researched financial aid programs with the desperation of someone planning an escape route through enemy territory. I lied constantly that year. I lied about staying after school. I lied about extra shifts at the bakery. I lied about bus rides to Philadelphia for testing exams. And every lie tasted terrible because I loved my family. That's the part people misunderstand. I loved them. I loved my mother's soup recipes. I loved the way my father whistled while fixing engines. I loved my grandmother's rough hands. I loved my sister Maddie so much it physically hurt sometimes. Leaving wasn't easy. It was surgery. Necessary. Bloody. Permanent. The MIT acceptance arrived on a Thursday afternoon in March. I saw the envelope sticking out of the mailbox before I reached the porch. Thick. Every high school senior in America knows what thick means. I carried it upstairs under my coat like contraband and locked myself in the bathroom. When I opened it, the first word I saw was, "Congratulations." Then, full need-based scholarship. Then, housing and meal plan included. I stopped breathing for a second. Not metaphorically. Actually. Because up until that moment, MIT had been a fantasy. A private test. A secret proof. I applied because I needed to know whether someone outside Pottsville believed I could become more than what my family planned for me. I never expected them to say yes. I definitely never expected them to pay for it. I sat on the edge of the bathtub crying silently into my palms while the radiator hissed beside me. The plan had always been to refuse. Apply secretly. Get rejected or accepted. Hide the evidence. Stay home. But full scholarship changed everything. For the first time in my life, leaving became possible. And possibility is a dangerous thing once it enters a person. I hid the letter beneath the bathroom mat and went downstairs to dinner pretending my entire world hadn't just cracked open. My mother asked why I looked pale. I told her I had a headache. In truth, my whole body felt like a lit match. The next 36 hours became a countdown toward disaster. Because another envelope was coming. Financial forms. Housing documents. Official paperwork impossible to hide. I needed a plan. Instead, my mother found the letter first. Friday evening. 5:12 p.m. She was folding laundry at the dining table when I came home. White towels stacked neatly. Dish rags folded in thirds. My father's work coveralls arranged with military precision. And there, beside the towels, lay my MIT acceptance letter. Already opened. Already read. My stomach dropped so hard I thought I might faint. My mother didn't look up immediately. She just kept folding. Bathroom trash isn't private, Teresa. Her voice sounded almost bored. I started explaining too quickly. Full scholarship. No debt. Engineering. Housing included. I'd rehearsed the speech 100 times in my head. But before I finished, she picked up the letter. Then she tore it in half. Slowly. The sound sliced straight through me. She turned the halves and tore them again. 4 pieces. Placed neatly on the table between folded dish towels. This is not who we are. That sentence became the dividing line of my life. Before it, daughter. After it, something else. My grandmother never looked away from the television. My sister gripped the staircase railing so tightly her knuckles turned white. And my father, my quiet father, stayed in the garage pretending not to hear. That hurt worst of all. The silence. By evening, the family council had assembled. My Aunt Carol arrived within minutes like she'd been waiting years for this conversation. The 4 torn pieces remained on the table untouched. A warning. A funeral display. The eldest daughter stays, my grandmother repeated several times like a prayer. I stayed, Aunt Carol added proudly. Your mother stayed. You stay. Nobody asked what I wanted. Nobody asked how hard I'd worked. Nobody asked about the scholarship. Nobody asked whether I was afraid. They talked about my future like I wasn't sitting there listening. I realized something terrifying that night. The decision about my life had been made long before I was born. I was just the latest girl expected to obey it. Around 1:40 in the morning, after the house finally quieted, I crept downstairs barefoot. The torn letter still sat on the dining table. My mother had left it there intentionally. A lesson. I gathered the pieces carefully and carried them upstairs to the bathroom. Then I opened the medicine cabinet. The Scotch tape was exactly where it had always been. I sat on the tile floor cross-legged and began repairing the letter. Strip by strip. Edge by edge. Like stitching skin. My hands shook so badly I had to redo one section 3 times. And somewhere during that process, something inside me hardened. Not into anger. Into clarity. My mother had taught me to mend things my entire life. Torn hems. Broken buttons. Cracked dishes. She just never imagined I would use those lessons against the future she chose for me. At 3:40 a.m., I slipped a note beneath my little sister Maddie's pillow. I told her I loved her. I told her not to be scared. I promised I would write. Then I packed everything important into one broken duffel bag. 3 shirts, jeans, toothbrush, transcript, SAT prep book, $340 in babysitting money. At 4:11, I walked downstairs. The garage light was on. My father stood at his workbench pretending to fix an old carburetor. He looked up when I entered. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he reached slowly into his wallet and removed 4 $20 bills. $80. Probably everything he had until next payday. For the bus, he said. That nearly broke me. Not because of the money. Because it was the only way he knew how to say, I can't stop your mother. But I see you. I took the cash. He turned back toward the engine. Neither of us said goodbye. Some grief is too large for language. The Greyhound station smelled like gasoline and burnt coffee. I bought a one-way ticket to Boston at 5:14 in the morning. The bus left 8 minutes later. As we pulled away, I looked through the window toward my street. The kitchen light in our house was on. And there, behind the curtains, stood my mother holding a coffee cup. Watching. I'll never know whether she saw me. I didn't wave. The ride to Boston lasted 13 hours and changed my entire life. I arrived exhausted, hungry, terrified, and 18 years old with a taped acceptance letter folded inside my jacket. 3 days later, a woman named Dr. Marina Ortiz found me asleep outside an office in the Student Services building. She bought me eggs and toast. Then she looked at the taped letter for a very long time before saying something I would remember forever. Keep this. I nodded and started folding it again. No, she said softly. Frame it. That woman saved me more than once. MIT was brutal. People imagine genius schools as magical places full of effortless brilliance. They're not. They're pressure cookers. I worked constantly. Classes, research, dining hall shifts, lab hours, tutoring. I survived on caffeine and stubbornness. But for the first time in my life, nobody asked me to shrink. Nobody told me ambition was arrogance. Nobody treated intelligence like betrayal. I emailed my mother twice during freshman year. No response. I stopped trying. Then, during sophomore year, I received an email from Maddie. Subject line: Mom. Inside were 3 sentences. She told the church you're dead. Father Hennessy asked about you after Mass. Aunt Carol confirmed it. I stared at the screen for a full minute without moving. My mother had told the town I died. Not metaphorically. Literally. Because a dead daughter was easier to explain than a daughter who left. That realization hollowed something out inside me. I didn't cry. I just sat there thinking about how grief and shame can look identical from the outside. Years passed. I graduated. Stayed for doctoral work. Helped develop hospital sensor technology through a university spin-out company called SenScore. Money followed eventually. Not overnight. Not magically. Slowly. Patent shares. Equity. Funding rounds. One morning I woke up and realized my portion of the company was worth more money than anyone in my family had ever seen. And strangely, that wasn't the moment I thought about revenge. The moment came later. Because revenge wasn't really what I wanted. I wanted interruption. I wanted the cycle to stop somewhere before it reached another little girl. That little girl was Haley, Maddie's daughter. 5 years old. Blonde hair. Curious eyes. Already being told stories about staying close to family. When my father finally called and admitted the conversations had already started around Haley, I understood immediately. The tradition was moving forward again. Like disease. And suddenly I knew exactly what I had to do. Not scream. Not accuse. Not punish. Demonstrate. Quietly. Publicly. Irrevocably. So I hired a lawyer in Boston and established a $250,000 education trust for every descendant of our family. Girls and boys both. Trade school. College. Certification programs. Any dream. Funded fully. I named it the Davis Daughters Education Trust on purpose. Because sometimes healing requires looking directly at the wound. Then I packed a briefcase. Inside it, I placed the trust documents, my diploma, a photograph of my mother at 18 holding her own taped nursing school acceptance letter, a letter I discovered hidden beneath recipe cards in the family box she secretly mailed me years earlier. That discovery changed everything. Because my mother had once been exactly like me. Brilliant. Hopeful. Accepted into nursing school. And someone, almost certainly my grandmother, had torn her future apart too. She taped her letter back together. Then stayed anyway. And years later, she repeated the same violence on me. That realization didn't excuse her. But it explained her. Pain passed down through generations often disguises itself as tradition. By the time I drove back into Pottsville 7 years later, I no longer felt 18. I felt inevitable. My mother opened the door before the birthday party and told me to wait in the car. "You're early," she said coldly. No hug. No welcome. Just caution. Like she already sensed something dangerous had arrived with me. The party filled slowly. Church friends. Relatives. Neighbors. 30 people packed into the living room while my grandmother sat proudly in her green chair like a queen preparing court. Haley played on the carpet with a plastic horse. At 12:31, my grandmother stood to give a toast. And right on schedule, she said it again. Davis women stay close. Then she looked directly at Haley. One day, our Haley will stay too. Glasses lifted around the room. To staying. Everyone repeated it. Everyone except me. And Maddie. That mattered. My mother approached me afterward with panic hiding beneath anger. "Don't," she whispered. "I already decided," I answered calmly. That terrified her more. I walked across the room and knelt beside Haley. She looked up at me curiously. I opened the briefcase, removed the taped MIT letter, laid it gently on the carpet between us. "This is from when I was 18, I told her softly. "It says somebody believed in me." Haley touched the edge carefully. My mother's voice cracked across the room. "Teresa, stop." But I kept going. "One day somebody will believe in you too," I told Haley. "And when they do, you're allowed to go." Then I stood, removed the cream-colored trust envelope, placed it on the coffee table beside the birthday cake. "This contains $250,000 for education," I said evenly. "For every child in this family." The room froze. You could actually feel the silence land. My Aunt Carol stood first. "You can't do this here." "I already did," I answered. My grandmother rose trembling with fury. "The eldest daughter stays." And then my mother said the words she'd spoken 7 years earlier. "This is not who we are." I looked at her. Really looked at her. At the gray in her hair. At the exhaustion in her face. At the 18-year-old girl still buried somewhere underneath decades of obedience. And I answered quietly. "Then I'm not who we are." No yelling. No tears. Just truth. Then I placed the photograph of her nursing school acceptance beside the cake. Her face drained of color when she saw it. For a second, the entire room disappeared around us. There were only 2 women left. The daughter who stayed. And the daughter who didn't. "You went through my things," she whispered. "Maddie found the recipe box." My mother turned toward my sister in disbelief. And Maddie. Sweet, quiet Maddie. Didn't apologize. She simply held the taped MIT letter against her chest while Haley leaned against her knee. That image still lives inside me. 3 generations in one frame. The grandmother who enforced the rule. The daughter who obeyed it. The daughter who broke it. And the little girl who might never have to choose between love and freedom at all. I picked up my briefcase. Lighter now. Because the important things had already been left behind. At the door, I paused one final time. "I taped mine too, Mom," I said softly. Same brand of tape. Then I walked out. I expected triumph afterward. Closure. Relief. Vindication. Instead, I sat in the freezing rental car shaking so hard I couldn't start the engine for almost 10 minutes. Because ending generational pain doesn't feel victorious. It feels heartbreaking. You mourn the version of your family that never learned how to love without sacrifice. A knock sounded on my window. Maddie stood outside holding the trust documents and the taped letter. "Haley wants to keep this," she said. "She can." Is the trust real? Fully funded. Maddie nodded slowly. Then she asked the question that mattered most. Are you coming back? And the truth was, I didn't know. Because forgiveness isn't a door you walk through once. It's a hallway. Long. Uneven. Full of rooms you're not ready to enter yet. 3 months later, my father called again. Haley had enrolled in a Saturday science program. Paid for through the trust. She loves it, he said quietly. She built a bridge out of popsicle sticks yesterday. I stood in my Cambridge kitchen crying over chopped onions while my father described a little girl discovering possibility for the first time. Not because I saved her. Because maybe nobody would need saving after her. Weeks later, a pink envelope arrived. Inside was a crayon drawing from Haley. A giant brick building with her name written across the top. And tucked carefully inside the drawing was my old MIT acceptance letter. The taped one. On the back, Maddie had written a sentence Haley dictated herself. I'm done with this one. I'll write my own. I framed the letter again after that. Same cheap black frame. Same browning tape. But it means something different now. At 18, that letter represented escape. Now it represents inheritance. Not the inheritance my grandmother intended. A better one. Permission. That's all most people really need. Someone to stand in front of them and say, you are allowed to become larger than this room. You are allowed to leave. You are allowed to dream without apologizing for it. My mother still doesn't speak about what happened at the birthday party. But last Christmas, something changed. A package arrived at my apartment without a return address. Inside was a recipe card. Applesauce cake. My mother's handwriting. Nothing else. No note. No apology. No explanation. Just the recipe. Folded carefully beside a brand new roll of Scotch tape. And for the first time in years, I understood something important. Sometimes love survives in the only language people were ever taught to speak. My mother couldn't say she was sorry. But she sent me tape. Not to repair what she broke. That part was already done. She sent it because somewhere deep inside herself, the 18-year-old girl with the torn nursing school letter finally recognized me. And maybe, just maybe, recognized herself too. That's how stories like this end. Not with revenge. Not with screaming. Not with perfect reconciliation. But with an interruption. One daughter is leaving. One sister is watching. One little girl is drawing her own future in red crayon instead of inheriting somebody else's fear. And somewhere in a kitchen in Pennsylvania, an old woman opening a drawer and realizing the tradition stopped with her. Quietly. Without permission. Just like it began.